Hey everybody, my name is Mike Montgomery, and today I'm going to show you every step for building a mortar shower bed, from installing the drain all the way to being ready for tile. So let's get started on Modern Builds. Welcome everybody to the bathroom renovation. This is the shower where I used to have a toilet tucked into this corner. We've already taken that out, and I'm going to be upgrading this bathroom from a half bath to a 3/4 by adding a shower. To begin with, we had some really damaged subfloor where the toilet used to be, but before I could tear that out, I needed to get the drywall out so I had access to the edges of the plywood. We're also going to need to replace this with fiber cement board before we tile anyways, so this is a necessary step. I split the subfloor plywood in half with my circular saw, that way I could use a pry bar to get it loose. I was working around the 2-inch PVC that I had a plumber install for the drain, and it was a really tight fit. There was basically no clearance around it, so getting this second piece of the subfloor up was difficult, but it wasn't too tough. We got it! Oh man, that was a lot tougher than I expected. And we'll be putting down a new piece of tar paper between the decking and the new plywood. I'm gonna need to make some space for this drain, and I've got a floor joist right here, so I'm hoping we're gonna be able to shift over a little. At first, I just cut a really small opening to make sure that there was nothing in my way, and once I knew that I was safe, I cut about a 4-inch square to see if this pipe had wiggle room so that I could sit more square to the decking, because it was previously leaning. At Home Depot, I was able to get the same thickness plywood as the rest of the subfloor in the house. That's 15/32 of an inch if I remember correctly. I found what the center point of my drain was, and from there, I marked, measured, and then cut out a 4-inch hole for the drain to recess into. I cut this out with my jigsaw after making an access hole with a 1/2-inch spade bit. This was also the perfect time to cut a new piece of roofing felt or tar paper, and this goes in between the decking and the subfloor, as well as between the subfloor and our first layer of mortar. I'm cutting both of these pieces now because the plywood subfloor is the perfect template for the outline and the center point for the drain. Back in the bathroom, I marked and cut my PVC pipe to the correct height so that that drain sat about a 1/2 of an inch above my subfloor. After I made the cut, I cleaned it up and chamfered it with a little bit of sandpaper, and then I did a dry test fit to make sure my measurements were accurate. That should be perfect. So now we're really making progress, and this is going to start assembling quickly. After I put my tar paper down, I could throw down my plywood subfloor piece and screw it down to the joists under the floor decking. This should have about an 1/8-inch gap between the wall. And now it's time to connect our drain. First, I'll apply primer to the drain. And once this is on, you'll want to let it set for about 30 seconds so you get a strong bond. And next, I can apply my cement. In this clip, I'm putting it on a little bit heavy, but I would rather do that than not have enough. You can always clean a little squeeze out. And you'll want to give it a little bit of a twist to help the cement grab, and it helps it slide on there more easily. If I screwed this directly to the subfloor, it would only sit about a 1/4 of an inch above it, so I used these shims to get it to the correct height, and I double checked it was sitting as level as I could get it. Considering we got it 90% more straight than it was when we started, I'm happy with the result. And now we're all cleaned up, and we're going to move on to cutting the 2x10 blocking for between the 2x4 studs. I used my 12-inch speed square with my circular saw to make sure I got square cuts. It also just helped make sure that I got them cut to the correct measurement, because each piece was a different length. And now these should just slide right in. And once this blocking is in, it basically acts as a backboard for our shower liner. That way it's 100% supported rather than just trying to be nailed onto the 2x4 studs or something like that. You won't be able to nail from every end, so toenail wear necessary. And check out this custom piece that I cut so I could fit around all these wires. It really wasn't too complicated. I just used my table saw to cut these grooves by raising the height of the blade to whatever amount I wanted to cut away. And then using my miter square, I cut these dado grooves. And this should hopefully give me the most amount of meat left on this wood, so this whole perimeter is as strong as it can be. Let's check the fit. It's perfect. We took a little off the top, but that nail actually is really sunk in there. All good. I got a pretty tight squeeze with everything, but that really isn't necessary. Just make sure you've sunk all of your nail heads in. And I really am happy with how all this 2x10 blocking went. Everything definitely feels more rigid. And our final step before our mortar bed is to build the front curb, which is crazy simple. I'm just gonna cut 3 2x4s to the same length that I'm ultimately gonna end up stacking together and attaching to the subfloor. This will all get waterproofed and you're gonna see how it happens, so make sure and stay tuned. I measured off the back wall and double checked everything was square before I nailed down each layer. And after a quick length adjustment, I double checked the fit of my second layer of tar paper, and once I knew it was a good fit, I used it as a template to cut my wire mesh. And I just used some tin snips for this. The wire mesh is reinforcement for the first layer of this mortar called the Preslope. And the tar paper is really a moisture barrier for while the mortar is curing. You don't want the water to wick away into the plywood too quickly, and that's why it's there. And now that everything's stapled down, we are ready for our Preslope mortar bed pour. The math for figuring out your pre-slope is actually really simple. You just need a slope of 1/4 inch over every foot, plus whatever the height of your drain is. For me, 1/2 inch. Around these 3 sides of my perimeter, it averages out to about 1.5 feet from the drain to the wall. But I'm going to be referencing this far part that I mentioned. It's about 2 feet, a little bit less from that wall. So that means the 1/4 inch per slope foot needs to be multiplied by 2 for 1/2 inch, and then we'll add that 1/2 inch for the drain. So now I'll use a level to make sure that I've got a really flat line 1 inch up all the way around the wall. I also see some people making a mark a little higher than they actually want to be, that way it's always visible. And I just say do what works best for you. After disassembling these parts of the drain that go on after the membrane, I used painter's tape to cover up the actual drain so I didn't get any mortar down there. I also put a piece of tar paper around this old vent pipe so the mortar doesn't interact with it at all. And now it's time to mix. I'll be using this Mapei or MyPay 4-to-1 mud bed mix, which says it's ideal for shower beds. With any product like this, I would highly recommend just following the directions on the bag. It's specially formulated and they definitely know how much water to put to get the best results. But you want it to be able to clump up by hand like this and not lose its shape. But if it crumbles, then you know that it's still too dry. I started by adding mortar to the back of the shower and getting that first bit level to the line that we made with our permanent marker. Then backfilling towards the drain. And these screening boards are gonna help making the slope really simple. On one side, I'll pivot from the drain because I want this mortar to be flush with it. And then on the other side, I'll use it to match the line that we've already made. It worked out pretty convenient that 1 inch was the top of this 2x4. So we're just gonna bring this down a little bit to match that. And notice how this end is on the drain. This is how we screed away the excess. And now, I'm gonna switch to my shorter one so that I'm referencing closer to the edge instead of over here. And one more time, we'll go shorter. And hopefully you can see how much closer we've already gotten. On this first pass, we're just going for a B-, not an A+ yet. And now I'll start cleaning some of this up with the actual trowel. And in this step, you can really start seeing the shape get refined. And then I backfilled any negative spaces or voids before doing our second screeding. And now we are starting to look really, really good. I don't think I'm gonna have enough to finish this out, unfortunately. It's gonna be really close. I just mixed up about 1/4 of a bag by hand, and as I went, I constantly did that test where I balled it up to make sure it wasn't too dry or too wet. I followed the same steps on the front of this pre-slope, but I kind of stuck to the shorter screeding boards. All right, that was a good guess. I don't think I had very much extra there. And now I should be able to smooth this out by hand and totally blend it. And this is where I would say we are going for that A+ or A-. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. We are doing another layer on top of this. So I really don't think that could have gone better, but we'll have to come back tomorrow morning to check to see how it cures and to do our final second pour. But right now, I'm gonna give a very sweaty thank you to the sponsor of today's episode, Squarespace. For a long time, Squarespace has been your one-stop shop for an online store, custom website, or just a domain. But designing your own website has never been easier now to Blueprint AI and their enhanced search engine optimization. Using the AI text prompt to describe your business and your brand, along with the website you want to create, Squarespace's Blueprint AI takes all that information and then builds your own design template, where you can edit infinitely from there. There's also no limits to the number of products that you can sell using a Squarespace store, whether that's a physical good, a digital good, or a service product. And online customers have tons of payment options. Customers can pay with credit cards, PayPal, or Apple Pay. And now in eligible countries, customers can buy now and pay later using ClearPay and Afterpay. And the last Squarespace feature I want to talk about are their online courses. You can use Squarespace's tools to build your online course from scratch, turning your knowledge into income. And you can choose whether you want that to be a one-time payment or a recurring subscription fee. So to learn more, make sure and follow my link in the description, squarespace.com/modernbuilds, where you can build out your entire Squarespace site without entering any of your credit card info. But then when it's time to make your site live, don't forget to use my code, ModernBuilds, for 10% off your first site, store, or domain through Squarespace. As always, huge thanks to Squarespace for supporting Modern Builds content, and you all for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. I have awesome news. It's been a little less than 24 hours, but our mortar bed is cured and looks awesome. I'm gonna scrape away a couple of these little loose pieces and get everything cleaned up, and I'll be ready to install my pan liner. I'm gonna go ahead and unfold this outside so I can sit in the sun for about 15 minutes so it can flatten out and be a little easier to fold. And while that's happening, I'm gonna measure for the liner. The bottom here is basically 34 inches wide, and I want it to go up 6 inches around the wall on all 3 sides and over the curb. I used a straight edge, and I would err on the side of cutting this an inch or so larger than you need. You can always trim a little bit of excess once it's installed. I used a little bit of silicone in between this drain piece and the liner just to make sure that there's a seal that would never go bad, and then plopped my liner in place and started lining it against the back wall. And you want to attach to every stud. You can also staple these. Kind of what that one ended up being. And next we'll do a close-up on a corner. And it's important that you just don't cut this corner. Instead, you want to fold it. So first I'm going to make sure that it's actually got no slack and it's in the corner nicely. And then when I press into the corner, you can see it naturally folding on itself, just like that, in a way that folds flat without me needing to cut it. I stuck a nail through all of those layers above where the cement board is eventually gonna lay over the top of this liner. And the steps on the previous corner are really similar to what I did on this front curb. You can see how I make a custom cut after I make sure it's folded into the corner really well. And then with this extra cutoff piece, I used it as a backer piece that I'll glue on, but for now, we'll just nail that in place. And before the silicone dries, we'll address the drain. I used a utility knife to cut through where all 4 of those bolts can poke through. After that, I cut the center drain hole. And next, I'm gonna use some of this PVC cement. I used this everywhere I've already got overlapping seams, but then I used these inside corner patches to make sure that everything is super waterproof. I'll leave links to these and everything else I used down below in the description. And I totally botched this corner, but I'm gonna do my best to make it look decent. Either way, I'll be certain it's waterproof. Even though it kind of looks tragic and there's no way I would leave this without a patch, once the patch was on, I was really confident that this is super waterproof. Before I secure this down, I'm gonna make sure that the liner is all the way in the corner, like pressed in, and then I'll fold it over and then nail it here. That way I don't have fasteners on the top. There's never gonna be standing water on the steps, so it's really not a big deal, but we are now ready for our mortar bed. Now I can install this part of my drain, and this is pretty similar to all drains. And I'm gonna raise this to about 1.5 inches, the same as a 2x4. And this is what I'll use to mark my reference line around the perimeter, and I'll make sure it's sitting level before I mark it. Remember, we've already established the slope with the first coat called the pre-slope. And so now we just wanna match it, maybe just make it a little more aggressive to be safe. And it's a good idea to double check that you are in fact sloped. And you can see the bubble there is by pretty much 1 inch. That's perfect. Before I add my mortar, I'm gonna add this little bit of pea gravel around the shower drain. This allows any potential water to weep through back into the drain. And now we can add our mortar. Once again, we're looking for a relatively dry mix here. We're not looking for anything wet. It needs to hold its shape. I'll start again here towards the back while I've still got easy access. And this time, before I get too much material, I'm gonna go ahead and flatten out the back and get it to the right level. And if you don't trust your eye, or if this seems difficult, you could always use spacer boards around your perimeter. Right there's a pretty decent starting spot. And now I'll work this way. If you do that, after you screed everything, make sure you remove those boards. I think that's a pretty good starting point again. To me, this seems like a quicker, easier method, but you let me know down in the comments if you've done both. That all looks close to the line I drew, but now let's make sure it's level. That's almost perfect. The back is a tiny bit high. The right side's high here, I can tell. And then back there, we're very close. So this corner here is a bit high. Just try and make it to where we can see that line again. Wow, that's dead level. So is this one. Awesome. Perfect. All right, so now we can start filling it in. To me, that was way easier than using spacer boards, removing them, and then backfilling all of that mortar where the board was. Dripping sweat. I was hoping I wouldn't have to do another bag. This is where I made a sort of tragic mistake. I added a little bit too much water, and this was my last bag of mortar, so I couldn't add more mix. Almost done. Hydrate. It was a little bit too watery, but it wasn't anything catastrophic. Maybe I was being dramatic a second ago. All right, now we should actually be screeding here towards the drain. The more I worked the mortar, the more I got a little bit of water to rise to the surface, but I got most of that out of there. This is going really great. We're gonna go ahead and fill up the rest of this shower pan. We're gonna really make sure to pack it into the corner, just like we did earlier, and build it up to the permanent marker line. Just like before, we're trying to get this like 70% of the way sloped, and then we'll get it refined on the second pass. So that's our first pass done. I'm gonna double check that we're sitting level around all of our edges before we do a final screed. That's perfect. So now I'm just hoping that this side is good, which it's very close. The front needs to come down just a tad. So I just removed a little material with my trowel. Oh man, the front needs to come up a little bit now. So we'll put a little bit back in. We are now level. Yep, that's perfect. We just need to double check the front. And that's perfect. You can tell I've got a little too much water in my mix because it's standing on the top, but it's still holding its shape perfect, which is the most important thing. I didn't get the best footage during this second stage of the slope just because my body was in the way of the camera quite a bit. And once the water had settled towards the drain, I used a towel to wipe it all up before smoothing everything out for a final time. I won't lie, I'm bummed about adding too much water, but we'll check back tomorrow and see how it looks. Oh, check that out. Even though it took a few extra hours for the water to wick away from our mortar bed, it looks great. Everything is sloping towards the drain, but all of our perimeter edges are super level. That's gonna make tiling so much easier. Really quick, I cleaned up the chrome part of our drain. I made sure it had the plastic cover on while we were doing our mortar bed pour. And now we are ready for tile. Boom! After a little framing, electrical, and drywall, we'll close this whole thing up, and I'll make a video on how to install the cement board and waterproof your shower wall. And then we'll be ready for a full video on tiling the floor and the walls of this shower to complete the series. So make sure to click the subscribe and notification bell below. Thanks again for watching. This has been another episode of Mike's First Flip. It's Mike's First Flip. That's me. See you next time. Bye.